everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits. Sometimes I like to dye twisted skeins of yarn to get some really fun patterns on it. But the pattern that we get when we dye a full 100-gram skein of yarn is very different than when you dye mini skeins because of the thickness of the yarn, the amount of twist you can get per length of yarn. Those variables affect the amount of resist you have and then the finished effect. And so I thought, what would happen if I took a really long skein of yarn, like a 5 to 6 meter skein of yarn, twisted that and dyed it? Would we have something? I imagine it would be closer to the mini skein, but how close? And so this is exactly what we're gonna do today. But before we go look at our yarn, we have a word from today's sponsor. This portion of today's episode of Dyepot Weekly is sponsored by the Color Alchemy Masterclass, an in-depth online dyeing course taught by educator and fiber artist Alana Wilcox. Color Alchemy will take you beyond just dyeing yarn and fiber. The course focuses on really understanding color, how to go from digital color inspiration to a physical dyed project, and how to get reproducible results even on different fibers and yarn bases. This year's summer session will run from July through September, and registration closes on June 19th, 2026. The Color Alchemy Masterclass combines on-demand lessons with 4 live Zoom sessions, focusing on using an inspiration photo to pull a digital color palette, translating those palettes into dye formulas, understanding why digital colors and dyed fiber can behave differently, and organizing their dye notes so that way you can reproduce your results later on. Outside of the live Zoom sessions, there's ongoing support on Discord for current course participants and another private group for alumni. And here participants can ask questions, share results, and get direct feedback from both Alana herself and the rest of the Color Alchemy community. I haven't taken the Color Alchemy Masterclass myself, but I have collaborated with Alana a number of times. I've used some of her digital dye recipes with great results, and I've also reviewed her creating a digital dye notebook on-demand course. And I find Alana's teaching style to be really clear, informative, and approachable. You can learn more about the Color Alchemy Masterclass on Alana's website, alanawilcox.com. I'll have a link down in the video description. Spots are limited and registration for the summer session ends on June 19th. Color Alchemy Masterclass, thank you so much for sponsoring this portion of today's video. I'm about to show you the yarn that we're going to be using for today's project. And I didn't want to untwist the factory twist in our 10-gram micro skein, 20-gram mini skein of yarn. And I'm also using a commercial long hank that I think is 5 meters in circumference. Now, going through the effort to make a really long skein does take a lot more effort than dyeing 10-gram minis. And so I guess it would be a choice of, if the results are similar, we would have to make a choice in the end if you want to weave in a bunch of loose ends or deal with reskeining yarn to get something that is super, super big. All the yarn we're dyeing today is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. 3 of our skeins are about 130 grams total, is all Wool to Dye For's platinum stock. And then we have Knit Pick Stroll as our other 100-gram skein. Now, this is the same yarn that I dyed in that Chanukah video that I mentioned at the very beginning. In my experience, Stroll does absorb color a little bit faster than platinum, but that is what it is. We're going to be dyeing everything all together, trying to mimic the conditions from that Chanukah video as best we can while using less yarn. And there's a few other changes I'll make along the way. Now, I don't want to untwist our mini skeins right now to show how long they are, but imagine that they are a little bit over double the length of as they are twisted. And they tend to be a little bit shorter overall than Stroll, which we have right here. And the reason why I don't want to untwist them right now is because this is the level of twist I'm going to attempt to replicate in this skein. However, I feel like there's still going to be more yarn within here than there might be in the 20-gram mini. It's going to be pretty close. But you can see the thickness difference between like the Stroll and the platinum is pretty extreme. Now our stroll, this guy I can twist by hand. I can twist and then allow the yarn to sort of fold back on itself. And you can envision right here that surface area difference I mentioned at the beginning, because there is a lot of yarn in the center of one of these twists, and there are so few strands on the 10 gram mini that there is less at the center. So if this goes the way I am anticipating, we will have the most white and the least white, and I don't know where our super long hank is gonna fall in there. Now this 5 meter skein is way too long for me to try to twist by hand. I cannot maintain tension, period. So we're gonna try to use my electric skein twister to do this. We're gonna try. Okay, I am attempting to film this. I have to get so far away in order to do this. And the pedal to turn the skein twister on doesn't even reach this far. So I'm gonna go on, tap off mode. And I'm gonna hold it sort of here in the center, tap it on, and then allow that twist to travel back up. I have no idea how long, but that's probably good. Okay, now I need to try to get this in half, okay? Oh, I feel like this is not nearly enough twist. Okay. Okay. But see, I feel like this is so much thicker still than those other minis that we have. I am just doing my best. Okay, we will neaten this and fix it. Okay. But trying to just even the twist, there's going to be a lot more twist at this end than there is throughout, because when you let it fold back on itself, you release a lot of twist. See if I can make it a little bit more even. Nope, we're holding a lot of the twist at this end. There's not a lot I can do about that. Oh, let me go back in front of the other camera. Here you can see the twist is way lighter up here than it is down here at the other end. And this is something that is going to be really hard for me to work back through without the assistance of another person. And you know, we may need to just leave it. How would I deal with this normally? The problem is that normally I might let it untwist, okay, and like just try to work some of that up. I've never dealt with something this long before. You know what? I think I'm just gonna have to let it be what it is, but there's so little twist up here and then so much down there. Maybe I need to just try this again. The problem is I don't think I can do much better. So you know what? I'm gonna stop overthinking this and we're gonna just use this as it is. And honestly, having some sections of tighter twist and looser twist might give some fun repeating interest into this yarn that normally is used for something self-striping. Now the twist in here at this edge is very lofty. It is pretty similar to the 20 and 10 gram mini. My hand twisted stroll is significantly more dense and a little bit tighter. I could retwist it a little bit looser, but I think that this is how I had it in that original project, and I think it's more similar to like maybe around like here or so. And really, the goal of this project isn't to just see like, okay, how much twist gives how much resist. The goal of this project is to see if twisting a really long skein like this gives a result that is more similar to our micro skein than it does to the full skein. Which, looking at this, you can see that we're probably gonna end up with something in between, but I think it's still gonna be really cool. I don't know if this will be relevant later, but twisted, this is about 4 times the length of either of these, but it's definitely thicker. It does not have as many twists per inch as our micro. And it is much closer to the 20 gram, but still maybe less, but I guess it varies. I am not going to emphasize the math that I did today, but I did want to tell you how I decided on the amount of water to use and the amount of dye to use for this project. In the 2025 Chanukah Night 4, I dyed 530 or 540 grams of yarn at a time using 2 grams of dye. Proportionally, for our 230 grams of yarn we're going to dye here, that would be about 0.86 grams of dye. And since we have reduced the total amount of yarn by, well, more than half, I am going to reduce the volume in the dye bath by half as well. So instead of a 32 cup of water with 8 tablespoons of white vinegar dye bath, I'm going to use 16 cups of water with 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. A same proportion, but this then when we add our 0.86 grams of dye, the concentration of the dye in the dye bath is going to be a bit reduced from what we did last time, but the conditions should have a more similar amount of crowding in the pot. And so this is, I guess, the easiest way for me to keep things as similar as I can. And I guess this is the moment when I should say, I hypothesize things will turn out the way they did in that video, but I cannot guarantee it. It's hard to know if that will happen again exactly as it did before or not. It's a different day. I did not rewatch the video, but I did go check the video description. I always include notes of the techniques and things that I do down there, which I refer back to all the time, and to make it easy for you to jump to the part of the video where you want to see information, but you can go look in the video description if you just want to see like the amount of dye or whatever, the dye colors and things like that that I measured out, assuming I measured them. But speaking of measuring, let's go set up our dye. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves and weighed out approximately 0.86 grams of the Sapphire Blue acid dye. If I was going to end up at 0.84 or 0.88, I'm not going to stress about that too much. The goal is to try to be close, just because I know I got these results with this ratio of dye to yarn. I dissolved our dye in hot tap water, not worrying about the final volume. But as I'm doing this, it is important to think that not only are we using less yarn, but the type of yarn we're adding into the pot is different. The camera's tilted, sorry. But when I was dyeing this yarn at Chanukah and we had 530 grams, only 100 grams of that was one of these full skeins. The rest was all 10 gram mini skeins. So this time, even though we're using the same amount of dye, it's really proportionally gonna be a little bit more dye for our 10 gram mini, because like a lot of the other yarn has less surface area. So I'm bringing this up that if things don't work the way I'm anticipating, maybe then I need to reattempt this project using even less dye. However, I don't think that's going to be necessary. I do think we're going to see a difference between our 2 different 100 gram skeins, and I actually do have one of the original mini skeins around somewhere that I could compare this to so we can see how different. But the fact that if we had halved like our last project, if I had 230 grams of yarn, there would have been a lot more mini skeins, a lot more surface area for the dye to come into contact with. So yeah, I guess there is another variable that I did not consider here today, which is totally fine because this is more of a qualitative experiment anyway. But whenever there are variables that you're not controlling for, as a trained scientist, these are things that I have to bring up and consider. I have my 16 cups of water nice and hot over here. We are on the electric hot plate now, but I did warm things up on the stove. I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. That 0.87 grams of dye. And I'm gonna rinse this out. Since the water is hot, if I were to put this plastic cup in there, it would melt. So I don't want to do that, but I do want to get almost all the dye out. I'm gonna give everything a good stir with my tongs. And now I'm gonna bring over all of our dry yarn all together and pop it in. And you'll notice that it is sinking straight in. I'm gonna push the full skein down a little bit. And now at this point, I'm gonna set a timer for 10 minutes. Now, you'll notice one other difference from when I did this with Chanukah. Over Chanukah, I put the pasta insert in the pot, so that way I could easily remove all of the yarn at once. Given that there's only 4 individual yarns here in the pot, it's not gonna be hard for me to remove them close together when the time comes. And we will evaluate in 10 minutes if that's when I want to remove this, like I did at Chanukah, or if we'll want to leave it in here a little bit longer. I will, yeah, and then I guess at that point we'll decide what we're gonna do. But for now, I'm gonna wait 10 minutes. And actually, another difference from Chanukah, I'm gonna go ahead and pop the lid here on the pot, just to keep some of the warmth inside. I did just turn the hot plate on, but it's not that hot yet. And so I want to try to maintain the temperature, and covering it will help keep some of that heat in there. Now, I often don't cover things, but, but today, because of the way I needed to film this and finish it on the hot plate, this is what makes the most sense for me. But today I'm filming this on the hot plate to give a behind the scenes sneak peek to ChemKnits patrons and postdoc channel members. It has been 10 minutes. The hot plate heated up nicely. Now, one other variable that I probably should have mentioned as I remove, which are you, my 20 gram mini skein, to start removing the yarn. The other variable that I should have thought more about was the fact that I'm on the electric hot plate now. But the nice thing is I am seeing resist as I remove our super long, oh my gosh, skein. I'm seeing variation in there. And so some little variables like how hot the dye bath is and things are harder to control. Here is our full skein. You can see that resist in there very clearly. You see those pops of white. Okay, what we're gonna do now is we still have dye left in here. So I'm gonna bring over a bonus skein of yarn that I like to call a yarn mop, because I'm literally going to mop up and soak up this excess color. I'm kind of dip dyeing. This yarn is also dry to start. But it'll be sort of like a nice tonal here. You'll see how quickly it soaked up that color. Sapphire Blue could be a good candidate for glazing. I've thought that about Brilliant Blue from Jacquard's acid dye line, but I wonder if that's the same pigment as Sapphire Blue. That I don't know. But now I'm gonna bring over my steamer insert, and we are above the water level in there. And I'm gonna take this yarn, all of this yarn that we removed, and pop it in here as we drip a little bit to apply some more heat on our yarn. Now I'm gonna go ahead and let everything here heat for 30 minutes. Really, I would be okay steam setting this yarn on top for 20. I like to aim for 30 minutes of heat. That seems to be a nice round number where things work well. But I'm gonna want that yarn mop on the bottom of the pot to heat for 30 minutes. So instead of doing 20 minutes steam, then removing the yarn and doing 30 minutes for the bottom, let's just do 30 minutes for everything, and then we'll come back. It has been 30 minutes. And so first we're gonna remove our yarn. Oh, this is our long one. It's still so long. Ooh, and I see like tonal variation in there. We've got our micro skein. Oh good. I see some variation in there too. I got nervous that it wasn't gonna work the way it had before, but I think it did, so that's great. Okay, I'm gonna set all of our twisted yarn aside to cool. While I'm at it, I'm gonna turn off the hot plate and unplug it. Remove the steamer insert. And see, this is the problem with the hot plate. If I was on my stove and I turned off the heat, the boiling would stop immediately. And that's not what happens with an electric hot plate, because you turn off the electricity and the hot plate is still retaining that warmth and needs to cool off. But anyway, here is our yarn mop. I'm gonna set this aside to cool as well. The mop will wash off camera, but once everything has cooled, we'll go ahead and like untwist our yarn. And it doesn't have to cool completely, it just has to cool enough that I can handle it without burning my fingers. I'm about to open things up, but I thought that I would give another look and show like all the white on the inside here. If I go to the interior of the 20 gram skein, I'm not seeing as much white as I am pastel blue. And similarly with the 10 gram mini, not maybe a hair that's close to white, but more pastel blue. Now let's see in here, okay, in the looser area, I'm seeing a lot more of the pastel blue. In the tighter area, we are seeing a lot more true white. Interesting. Because I mentioned that this side was mixed or twisted way tighter than the other. Now clearly, I could retwist our mini and micro skeins so that they have tighter twist. But there's really, like, that would be inconvenient. Ooh, goody, this looks just like what we had for Chanukah. It would be inconvenient to untwist and retwist the 10 gram minis. So sometimes it's really fun to get some results. Ooh, the 20 gram, you know, the 20 gram is a little bit similar. Like some of these color sections are bigger and we have some bigger uninterrupted pastel areas. But yeah, I guess maybe the thing to get not quite the exact effect, but closer would be to do this with 20 gram mini skeins. And I have to say, the wheels in my brain are turning. Okay, let's undo the full skein. So like in the middle, there's no like huge area of white without pastel, okay? But we do have overall a lot more white in here. You can see like some of the areas where the twist, where we had less color, but there's just a lot more contrast in this full skein. But now I'm gonna shift all of these down so we have space for the big one. Okay, I don't even know how I'm gonna untwist this well. Okay, I guess I'm just gonna do my best. This is gonna be a lot trickier. I'm having to dangle it over the floor to get the twist out as much as I can, and it's twisting around itself. Oh my goodness. This is tricky. Okay, okay. Here we go. All right. Okay, so what I am seeing is a lot more white in that middle area, so like over here, and of course where it was like folded over. I normally don't swatch things, but whenever I do a self-striping yarn, I like to make a swatch, mainly because that way you can get a feel of, okay, if I'm gonna deal with a 5 meter skein, what kind of effect would I get in terms of the repeat? And so we'll see if we feel sort of like oscillation of where the whites are versus not. I suspect we probably would, but it might be extraordinarily subtle. Now, I would say that the patterning on here is a lot more similar to our micro skeins. It's not the same, because if we look at like the length of one of these repeats, it's very different from the 10 gram mini. Here, let me move this over here. Okay, so for example, right here, where we have one of the lighter patches aligned, you can see that there's 3 on the 10 gram, or we have like 4 in the space where we have 3 on this one. And so comparison-wise, our long hank is way more similar to the mini skeins than it is to the long skein. And so this is a viable way to get the effect. But I still think I would be more inclined to do it on a bunch of 20 gram minis and do things that way. I'm gonna put these minis together because I think that if I were to do the technique on a bunch of 20 gram minis, there would still be a lot of ends to weave in, but not quite as many as with 10 gram micro skeins. And then, of course, when it comes to the full skein, which I'm now trying to loop up so that way I can protect it during washing and drying so we don't tangle it. I think that this is a viable option. Just, you know, I think I'd rather weave in some loose ends. Okay, but now let's go wash our yarn. When it comes to any technique, the real question and decision that you have to make is, as I add some dish soap, what is worth it to you? And you have to think and decide, okay, is it worth it for me to get a long hank or make a long hank and then rewind it to get the effect that I want? And sometimes if you want self-striping yarn, that could be worth it. But other times, instead of creating a self-striping yarn where you'll have those colors repeat without having to do anything, it may be a little bit easier to dye a set of mini skeins and create the striping on your own. It all depends on where you want to put that effort in. Is it at the dye phase, or is it later on when you're actually making the project? You want to control where your color transitions happen. And again, there is no right way, but as crafters, we all have different preferences. Like some people prefer purling to knitting. Maybe not many, but I vastly prefer the knit stitch. I can do that way faster. Some people prefer reading charts. Other people prefer reading line by line instructions that are written out. I'm a chart girl personally. And there's not a wrong answer here at all. It all depends on how people's brains work. Like if I'm reading out written instructions for color work or for a lace pattern, I can get confused and my brain can't think about where those stitches are relative to the ones in the previous round. But if I'm looking at a chart, I can look and see, okay, I see where the yarn or where my yarn overs need to be positioned relative to one another, and so I can kind of make sure things are happening in the right spot as I go. But anyway, we're not bleeding. I'm gonna go spin out the rest of this liquid in my spin dryer and we'll hang up the yarn to dry. I feel like I did a lot of our conclusions here while the yarn was still wet. And things still stand. I mean, our color repeats from our incredibly long hank are closer to our 20 gram skein, but they're still further apart than they are in the 20 or the 10. We did have a yarn mop here, and it's amazing how pastel this blue is compared to the blue we have from all of our twisted yarn. But I love that it is subtle and still quite tonal and beautiful. But what needs to happen next is I need to reskein this because it is not manageable as it is longer than I am tall. So let me go reskein it and make a swatch. Here you can see a little bit of me walking back and forth between two chairs, winding this yarn onto a niddy noddy. Now, I normally don't make swatches of the yarn I dye. I dye too many colorways and I just don't have the time to do that. But given that this yarn seemed to have an end of the twist that had more saturation than the other end, there's a chance we could have some self-striping-esque effect in our yarn, and if that's the case, I want to be able to see it and share it with you. So I need a swatch, so that way we could see what's what. Our swatch was knit with 20 stitches in stockinette using size 2 or 2.75 millimeter knitting needles. We definitely have some striping patterns in here. It's not very consistent because I think there were some darker patches on the lighter area here, but it could give a little bit of some randomness to the overall yarn. And this is not something that would be apparent if you just look at the yarn sort of laid flat since it's been reskeined. But you could get a feeling of this from seeing the yarn before I even untwisted it, that there was an area that seemed darker and an area that seemed lighter. I want to give another huge thank you to the Color Alchemy Masterclass for sponsoring a portion of today's video. Registration for the summer session ends on June 19th, or while there are still spots available. You can visit alanawilcox.com for more information, and I'll have Alana's website linked down in the video description. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I am so glad I took the time to do this video. I think that the results are so cool, and yeah, I guess it's a toss-up to me whether I would prefer to knit with 10 gram mini skeins to get that effect, or if I'd rather deal with reskeining a super long hank. I think it depends on which I dislike more, the reskeining or the weaving in a million loose ends at the end of a project. But you let me know down in the comment section what you would prefer. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And if there are other dyeing experiments and comparisons you would like to see me do, please let me know down in the comments section below. I pull from your questions and suggestions all the time as I create new videos. Thank you so much for watching.